that was a great finish to the NRL regular season. It came down to the very last game to decide the top 8. Well, at least for that 8th spot anyway. We had a spoon bowl, which we don't often get, and it was pretty one-sided in the end. The Tigers winning, or do you lose? I mean, they won the wooden spoon for the third year in a row. For this video, I'm going to start with a quick recap of round 27 and how we ended up with the top 8 we have, and then I'll show you the top 8 I predicted. I think it was at the end of round 21, which I guess there weren't too many surprises. Certainly how we ended up with the top 8 we have now, there was a few upsets and the like. And then I will preview this upcoming week 1 of the finals, so stick with me. I'll try and go as quick as I possibly can. So for the final round 27, the Storm absolutely pumped the Brisbane Broncos at Suncorp Stadium 50-12. Jerome Hughes and Warbrick scoring 3 tries each. The Storm rested Stars last week instead of this week, which did not do my fantasy team any favours. And then we had the Tigers. Expectedly, I felt the Eels were the better team coming into this game, but the Tigers put in one of their worst performances this year. And Tigers did lead 10-6 pretty early on in the game, but then when the Eels scored 3 tries from the 20th minute to half time, it was all over. And then we had the Rabbitohs losing to the Roosters 28-36. The Roosters' biggest talking point was the number of injuries they've had. The scoreline was slightly more flattering to the Rabbitohs in this one. The Rabbitohs scoring 3 tries in the last 10 minutes to make that game look a little bit closer than it was. First half, although, it was pretty close, wasn't it? And then we had the Dragons versus Raiders. This game, for these two teams, top 8 was still on the cards, but it all depended on other games. But anyway, so the Raiders winning this one in Sydney, but at 26-24, it was 18-0 after, what was that, 12 or 13 minutes, 18-0 to the Dragons, when I just thought that was all she wrote. But you kind of knew that the Raiders would get back into the game at some point. The score was 24-10 at half time, and then the Raiders just scoring the only team to score in the second half, scoring 3 tries to win it, and the last try was 2 minutes to go and needed the conversion to take the lead. So heck of a game in the end. And then the Bulldogs versus Cowboys. Well, this was exceptionally one-sided as well. A home game for the Bulldogs. We'll cover that off a little bit. But Cowboys winning comfortably 44-6. I think Matt Burden was probably one of the biggest, losses, outs for the Bulldogs there. 20-0 at half time, and then the Cowboys went on to win 44-6. The Bulldogs only scoring in around 60th minute there, so very one-sided, not exactly expected. Panthers winning 18-12 against the Titans in a close one. I think the Panthers really struggled on attack in that game, but Nathan Cleary's back this week, which we'll talk about in a minute. Seagulls losing 20-40 at home to the Sharks. The Sharks finding a bit of form, although they lost against the Warriors the week before, but certainly looked pretty good against the Seagulls with Nico Hines back. The Knights winning 14-6 against the Dolphins in the final game of the round to clinch that 8th spot. A pretty close, it wasn't a very exciting game. The Dolphins' defence, I guess kept that scoreline low. The Knights don't have a great attacking record this year. I think they have the lowest points scored in the top 8. But yeah, the Dolphins just couldn't quite get there in the end. And I really wanted the Dolphins to do that too. They haven't made the finals yet in their very, very short history. So that's a quick recap of the round that was, and we now have our top 8. So let's have a quick look at what I had a few rounds ago. I had the Panthers actually being minor premiers because I tipped the Panthers to beat the Storm. However, the Storm beat the Panthers by 2 points in that game in Penrith. And then the Panthers have lost 1 or 2 as well. So they sit 2 wins behind the Storm. Storm winning pretty comfortably. I had the Roosters 3rd, Sharks 4th. I had the Bulldogs fifth. I thought, the form that the Bulldogs were showing was much better than, I guess, anyone out other than the top four in the top eight. But the Bulldogs obviously losing to the Cowboys last week was the difference, really. So, yeah, the Cowboys finding a bit of form and taking that fifth spot. But that really doesn't matter too much. I guess it probably does for the Bulldogs, because I think that Seagulls game would have been harder than, say, if they had to play the Knights. But we will see. So then I didn't have the Knights making the top eight. They sort of came from nowhere. I think they've won 4 or so out of the last 5 games. I think I'll talk about that in a minute. But Raiders just missing out of the top 8. They finished level on points with the Knights, but their differential wasn't quite as good. And unfortunately for the Dolphins, who spent most of their season in the top 8, didn't quite get the job done. So I was pretty close with the top 8. Didn't get close at all with how we got to where we are now. There was quite a few upsets on the road there, but it was just a bit of fun for me just to sort of see where I thought we'd end up. But anyway, so week 1 of the finals. Yeah, look, only 4 games this weekend. It's weird. There's not as much footy. There's no fantasy, and I guess there's so much more time for activities. But yeah, Panthers versus Roosters is the first game. It's a home game for Panthers. Nathan Cleary is back. That's absolutely key. And the Panthers attack really struggled last week in particular. There's no other changes, so Panthers basically full strength and tracking pretty well in that department. The Roosters welcome back wingers Daniel Tupou and Dom Young. I think it's pretty important. But Lindsay Collins also returns from a rest, and Nat Butcher is back in the forward pack. No Jared Warrior-Hargraves, of course, he's suspended, or Brandon Smith through injury, but I think the biggest gap for the Roosters really is Sam Walker at halfback. But there's still class across the park, and otherwise they have a full strength backline. I guess the only omission there is Sam Walker, and otherwise that backline would be full strength. Which hasn't happened a lot for the Roosters yet this season. I really think Joseph Manu needs to step up a bit. I don't think he's been quite playing to his best, his standards. And due to the Roosters' injuries or suspensions, the bench is a little light on experience as well. Look, I heard during the week that the Panthers have beaten the Roosters in their last 9 games. The Panthers have won all of them. The Panthers 13 plus is more likely based on the odds that we have, which is weird because the line's only 8.5, but the Panthers are full streak with Cleary back and home, and the Roosters just have too many injuries for me. I think the Panthers win. I think it'll be close though. I'm leaning more towards 1-12, and I think points unders. I think it'll be reasonably low scoring, as finals footy would suggest. And Panthers didn't score many points last week. The line's a bit more difficult, but I think I'm just going to say that the Panthers, I think, cover that at 8.5, and the Panthers, let's just say, win by 10. So still within 1-12, and they cover the spread there. Storm versus Sharks. Storm, pretty strong favourites naturally. They're at home. And the line is 9.5, overs 46.5. Storm, they're at full strength with Ryan Pappenhausen back at fullback. Christian Welch is also returning to the bench after his illness. The Sharks are basically full strength also, although Hazelton's on the reserve list. I don't think he's likely to play, but we'll see. Storm have won 11 of their last 13 games, and you have to kind of discount the loss to the Cowboys in North Queensland because the Storm made a whole lot of changes. And in terms of their last 11 wins, it doesn't matter who's playing for the Storm. They've had players in and out through injury or otherwise. The Sharks have been doing well without Hines. The loss to the Warriors in the final minute of the game 2 weeks ago wasn't really anything to be too concerned about. But the Storm in Melbourne, that's a different challenge, of course. Don't forget the Sharks were able to beat the Storm in Melbourne earlier this year. It was round 10. The Sharks didn't have Hines playing that day, and Hines is obviously playing against his old club too in the Storm. And Blake Brayley was at halfback. So they haven't played. The two teams haven't played each other since. The Storm have only lost 2 games at home this year. That was obviously the Sharks and then the Dragons a little bit later on, which was a bit of a shock. And the Storm should have lost to the Warriors back in round 2. I think it was round 2 as well. Cronulla have lost each of their last 6 finals matches. which is quite unreal. They the loser of this game obviously gets a second chance. But look, I don't think the Sharks win here. And I'm leaning towards, I think it'll be close. Storm 1-12, and I'm going total points under. I think it's probably pretty safe to do for all games this week. The line is tricky at 9.5, but I think it'll be closer than 9 points, to be honest. And I think I think the Sharks will cover the line. All right, so moving on, Cowboys versus Knights up in Townsville. Cowboys pretty reasonably strong favourites, although the line is only 6.5. Total over 43.5. Jordan McLean, he returns for the Cowboys at prop, and otherwise the Cowboys are unchanged. They are pretty much operating at full strength. No changes to the Knights team, who did enough to beat the Dolphins and claim 8th spot last week. Kai Pearce-Paul, he may come into the side too, and I guess that'd be all but full strength. Jacob Saifiti unavailable. Otherwise, Knights are basically full strength as well, and continue with the halves pairing of Jack Cogger and Phoenix Crossland, which they've ran with for the last month or so. Cowboys have won 6 of their last 7, and one of the loss was that smashing the Broncos gave them a month ago, when the Broncos looked like they might scrape into the top 8. Wow, the wheels fell off there. The Knights have won 4 of their last 5, and the only loss being the Golden Point loss to Cronulla in Cronulla. Basically, the Knights have been playing finals football for the last month. Could that be an advantage? Perhaps. The only time these two teams have met this year was back in round 2, the Cowboys winning in Golden Point and Townsville in that one, and then not much separates these teams in my opinion. The Cowboys have won 3 more games than the Knights this year, and their points scored is much better. I think it's about 200 points more than the Knights have scored this year. I think there will be a few points in this one, though. I'm leaning more. Both defensive records aren't great, with the Cowboys actually having the worst points against out of all teams in the top 8. Their 4 points overs 43.5. I'm leaning towards that. But the Cowboys' attack and home advantage should be enough to win this one, in my opinion. I think it'll be close as well. Surprise, surprise. But I'm going Cowboys home field advantage 1-12 covering and I think the Cowboys will cover the line at 6.5. So say 8 points in this one. I think it'll be pretty close. Bulldogs, last game of week 1 of the finals is Bulldogs versus Seagulls. Bulldogs at home. Biggest talking point at the Dogs this week is Josh Addo-Carr. There's a bit going on there, but all I'll say is that he's decided to step down and not play this week. Matt Burton is back and was especially missed last week, I think, in particular, in the thumping that the Bulldogs received against the Cowboys. Gerald Skelton, Bronson Cherry are back, which boosts the back 3 with Carraz and Skelton on the wings. The Bulldogs were a bit light on wings, in that wing positions last week. Bulldogs are without Kurt Mann and Josh Addo-Carr, but otherwise pretty much full strength there. I think that Kurt Mann being injured is quite key in all fairness, and Tom Trebojevic is back for the Seagulls, and they wouldn't win this game without him. I think that's pretty easy to say. The Seagulls record with and without Tom Turbo is a very, very stark contrast. Without Jason Sabb, the Seagulls are not quite full strength, but although pretty handy wiggers anyway with Talau and Tommy Talau and Lehigh Hopewadi. Corey Waddell might make his way into the 17 as well. We don't have to go back too far to know what happened the last time these two teams met, do we? It was a couple of weeks ago. The Bulldogs lost at home against the Seagulls. Seagulls didn't offer much against the Sharks last week, at home. But yeah, and so the Seagulls have had pretty mixed form as well. But that could be more of it, like last week for the Seagulls, it could be more of a reflection with Tommy Turbo out. But the Bulldogs' home record has taken a bit of a back step in the last 2 weeks. They've lost both home games. The bookmakers just cannot split these two teams this week at all. I think the full form guide is hard to gauge. So let's go back a bit further than the last 2 weeks. Before the last two certainly for the Bulldogs, the last 2 losses, they were in great form. Really, they had won 5 in a row, and they need to try and find that form again. I think with Stephen Crichton and Matt Burton finally sort of in the team together, they haven't played in the team the last couple of weeks. It's been one in, one out. I think that gives the Bulldogs a much better chance of winning this game or finding that form that they had a few weeks ago. The Seagulls have been more up and down than that, obviously losing to the Sharks last week, but don't forget the 34-26 loss to the Tigers a few weeks ago. To the Tigers, no one should be losing to the Tigers. Turbo is absolutely key for the Seagulls, but I think the Bulldogs at home, with their very solid defensive record this season, I think they're only second to the Panthers. I'd have to double check, but yeah, look, the Bulldogs' defensive record is really, really strong, and I think that will be too good. They'll win a very close one. I think it'll be points unders. I mean, the line's 0.5. But yeah, look, after so many injuries this year, it's amazing to see how many teams are at full strength or near full strength this weekend. The Roosters being the exception to that, and that puts them at a disadvantage this week in particular. I don't think they'll win, of course, but they'll get that second chance. Anyway, if you have watched this, thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to the first week of finals this weekend. Enjoy. Cheers.